Do you still have those nightmares, baby? Where you see me, you still tell yourself you hate me. Won't believe it lately. I know I'm still the villain you told me. You look me in the eyes like you don't even know me. Did it kill you? Did it kill you? When I was there too, I was there too. You look me in the eyes like you don't even know me. You don't even know me. all you ever did was change. And I hate being with you, but I just cannot be alone. All the promises you break, you kept me at a distance, babe. Now I don't wanna see your face, but I hate being alone. Yeah, I hate being alone. But I hate being alone. Yeah, I hate being alone. But I hate being alone. Yeah, I hate being alone. Mistakes, 'cause all you ever did was change. And I hate being with you, but I just cannot be alone. All the promises you break, you kept me at a distance, babe. Now I don't wanna see your face, but I hate being alone. Yeah, I hate being alone. But I hate being alone. Yeah, I hate being alone. But I hate being alone. Yeah, I hate being alone.
Welcome to the ninth installment of Through the Looking Glass. Tonight we'll be discussing military budget, national budget, and foreign affairs. Lucy, would you like to start us off with this issue about just like what we're spending money on in our government? Would you like to start us out on that, Lucy?
Your mic just cut in for me, but what was that? I didn't hear what you said at first. I'm not sure if it was
I accidentally had my mic muted on Discord. The stream heard it though. I was just saying, welcome to the Looking Glass, episode 9, national budget, military spending, and overseas affairs. So, would you like to start us out on that, Lucy?
Sure. So last night when we were streaming, I mentioned that our military spending and our military budget and our budget in general over the last few decades has been out of control. And last year in March, Trump signed an absurd bill. He wasn't too happy about signing it. It wasn't one of his things, but he signed it to keep the government from shutting down and whatnot. He signed a $1.3 trillion bill, an omnibus spending bill, which basically is just a way of saying a collection of like smaller bills. But a lot of it had to do with the military. It included the largest defense budget for any country in the history of the whole entire world, which makes no sense to me.
Yeah, I would have to agree. What are we afraid of in America? You know what I mean? Like, what country are we afraid of? Like, do you think the defense budget is gonna stop a nuclear war. Like,
But I mean, Flav, like look at all the recent land invasions. I mean, the last time we've been invaded by land was like 120 years ago or like 200 years ago, Flav.
yeah,
Like, aren't you worried about?
I mean, they're gonna come on the boats, dude. Like, there's only like two or three ways I could see troops attacking America, man. Like, they're either gonna bomb the shit out of us, or they're gonna have to like beaches of Normandy, like paratroopers and like rush the beaches.
You cut out there, buddy.
I said like, there's only a couple ways you could attack America. You can bomb us. You can come by sea.
Well, I'll talk for Flav.
Hello.
You're back in.
Okay, it's okay. Yeah, it's my internet cutting out.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
lost you bombing.
Yeah, well, I was saying that there's only a couple ways you can attack America. You can bomb it, you can come by sea, or you can like paratrooper in, or missiles. I mean, I don't. There's like, we're a
I
lot more
don't.
secure just because of our geographical location than a lot of countries.
I don't think war goes that way. I think it's more about hurting our infrastructure, our cloud computing and online systems, or our banking systems. Because America has a bad infrastructure compared to, say, China, or nukes, EMPs.
I think that it is more cyber based and has been since at least the late 90s. And
Yeah.
supposedly that's something that we've been behind on, which I think we do follow a pattern like that where we kind of rest on our laurels and then someone else starts catching up or even overtakes us. And then we harness, billions of dollars going beast mode to catch up. There are 2 points I wanted to make. The first one, which I posted in the chat, is known as the Iron Triangle, which is the relationship between the electoral forces, which are the guys that get people into power,
Yeah.
the lawmakers, which are the guys we vote in, and then special interests. And the military-industrial complex, the MIC, is definitely a special interest. And we have a lot of patterns of guys and women leaving the military and then getting cushy jobs, getting cushy consulting jobs at the Pentagon because they know they're basically lobbyists. The other point I wanted to make, which I think will tie into what you guys were just talking about, is something that George Washington said, which was we need to beware. He said it in his farewell address. We need to beware of foreign entanglements. Essentially what we should be doing, what the vision that the founders had was that, among other things, was that we trade with everyone, but we're like allies with no one. So we can be
Yeah.
friends, but don't drag us into your baloney, which is what started to happen. If you look at the wars in the 1800s, the Americans were either fighting each other, maybe fighting their neighbors a little, like the Mexican-American War, or they were, busy slaughtering indigenous people to make way for their own guys.
Well, I mean, if you
But
think
that
about it in the
changed
day's
in the
terms,
20th century.
like
That changed in the 20th century, though. Suddenly we had a lot of foreign interventionism. And, I mean, what did we have to fear from the Kaiser?
yeah.
Hitler's a different kettle of fish. Maybe that idiot would have tried to nuke us if we had given him enough time. But frankly, the only reason we really went to war with Germany in the first place is because Germany declared war on us. We had guys that were aching to go over there. They're called Anglophiles, people that love English people.
Yeah.
And, Hitler kind of sealed his own fate, thank God, by provoking us along with the Japanese.
Yeah.
So
Well, I mean,
there's definitely a
think
fine
of,
line between.
when
Go
we
ahead.
think of a war of this scale today, like, I just don't see it happening, man. Like, once you start talking about like launching like missiles on developed nations and EMPs and stuff, like, that's totally different than bombing Iraq. Like, that is gonna upset the world, man. Like, just to make a move like that, like, can you imagine the level of war that we would have if like Russia attacked America or America attacked China or any of that? Like, can you imagine? Like, just try to fathom the amount of casualty, destruction, and technological warfare we're gonna have. Like, we haven't had an engagement like that ever in history. We've never had an engagement like that.
Well, I feel that Americans are inherited a little bit of stubbornness from their English homeland. So I think we see it all the time. Like we may be a slightly disunified group with a diverse set of opinions, but if you attack us, we pretty much all rally around the flag, and we clap
Yeah.
each other on the back and we start waving flags. So there's that kernel of, I'm just going to call it excellence for lack of a better word, that can bring us together when it comes to this. Now the question is whether or not it's a just war, and that's been a term that's been used for centuries.
Yeah.
Is it a just war? Was attacking? Say we go after the Sudan, which we don't. We never do. And that's part of the problem. I think is we have this perception that we're the good guys because guess what? Americans, on the whole, are actually very generous, pretty prosperous people. Uh, they regularly donate a ton of money, which just dwarfs even countries that provide foreign aid.
Yeah.
So, and that's in the private sector alone. That's why there's a lot of room for guys like Ron Paul or Rand Paul or other libertarian guys that say that we can rely on the private sector for charity because they see it every day. But I think part of the issue is, and what's really important about the military-industrial complex is, why are we fighting? Are we fighting so that Honeywell can replace our cruise missile stock? Because they were even joking about it in the Bosnia and Herzegovina when we blew the crap out of the tiny Balkan countries.
Yeah.
It was all over it. They were like, "Oh, well, these cruise missiles were expiring anyway." So it's like, okay, so what are we doing? And then also Iraq, if you look into it, was actually used as a test bed, and I'm assuming many other wars have been too. It was used as a test bed for various weapons, non-lethal and otherwise. So you have to ask yourself, why is it we're there in the first place? Afghanistan was almost clear cut why we were there. However, cracks started to show in that when you actually looked at it, like for the fact that the Taliban had been terrorizing Afghanistan for at least a decade, to the point where Iran was tired of their baloney and was saying, look, guys, if you don't get your radicals in line, we're going to do something about it.
Yeah.
Or the Sudan, like I mentioned earlier, they have these guys called Janjaweeds. These guys would literally fly around in helicopters and just machine gun tribals. They're guys, they're living in a tribal village. They, maybe they've got a gun or something, but they're just getting gunned down in droves. And George Clooney did more for the Sudan than pretty much anyone else, even the UN, even us. So there's this weird cognitive dissonance, I feel, where it's like, okay, we believe that we're just, but some of these wars, are they just there to work to pump up the economy? I believe that the second Iraq War definitely was there.
Now, I would like to get right back to this, and especially about Al Qaeda and America's influence in this right after. But I just wanted to say that a few minutes ago, Kathy posted in chat about Chinese warships, and my uncle, what he does is he works kind of for the government, kind of for a private company, but he sells helicopters, submarines, and similar equipment to foreign countries. And I know personally that China is way ahead of us in the game of submarines and stuff like that. I mean, they have submarines that are sometimes undetectable all over the coasts of the whole entire world. And what she was posting, it says Chinese warships with electromagnetic rail guns. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but I do know that the United States and probably China too now has the technology where, like in a movie like Star Wars or something, where you see people shooting at each other with lasers, it's the same kind of a thing. I mean, it doesn't work on a foggy day, but on a day where it's not foggy, we now have the technology to shoot aircrafts out of the sky from a carrier ship or a submarine with lasers.
Well, I'm pretty sure an electromagnetic railgun is something that like it propels a piece of matter like a steel rod or something at high speeds. That's a railgun, I believe.
Yep.
You're thinking of like a Gauss
And they have
rifle.
they have different types. Gauss rifles are ones where it's not a continuous rail, it's rings. And it goes through one ring, gets grabbed by the next ring, gets grabbed by the next ring, gets grabbed by the next ring. A railgun is just, it's straight up what it sounds like. It's a rail.
Yeah.
So, now one thing I want to say is that retention of technology and skills. the military has actually been quite concerned for, I believe, ever since after Bush II, that America is having trouble retaining their skills in highly technological devices. You may have actually seen, like, at least a few of the scandals where we found out that parts were coming from, in this case, it was China, and perhaps, had kind of infiltrated our supply chain. You shouldn't outsource everything, especially strategic resources. Now, one argument for having such a large budget is that, first off, we rely a lot on technology. We rely on technology because at the end of the day, and I think everyone would agree with me, we would rather cut a check instead of losing a soldier. It's like, oh, you shut down a drone, big deal, but that's not a human life, And I would prefer it that way. I mean, in war, there's a cost. Someone's going to die, Preferably it'll be the other guy if we have to fight. But I think that part of this budget and the growing budget is also just to retain, not only is it lining the pockets of people, but it also helps retain these valuable skills that we need. Like take China, for example. People make fun of China. You'll notice they've stopped. They were making fun of China for building cities that were not populated, just these ghost towns.
Yeah.
Well, if they had taken 20 seconds to think about it, they would have realized that what China's doing is skill retention. Because it's use it or lose it, guys. So it's like we have all these engineers, we have all these architects. Well, they're not working. They're not going to transmit this information over, and these careers are going to be seen as not attractive. Well, China's solution was, let's just build all of these cities. Yeah. And I feel that we do something similar. Now, that's in an ideal situation, without corruption, which there is, without lobbying, which there is, and without warmongering for profit, which there definitely is. So, all those aside, that is one argument for having a budget. I mean, should we have children going to GoFundMe to get their classmates to give them money for their cancer treatment when we can park a aircraft carrier anywhere in the world? No, I think that's pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, so definitely need to. I mean, I want to bring up a point first off is that the Cold War never ended. So these,
of
like, the way that I see it is, we still have there's like an Iron Curtain. You know what I mean? That we still have that in the world, and it separates America, England, the UK, Britain, all that, from Russia, China, North Korea, places like that. We never got over that mentality. So these wars in the Middle East, what you're seeing are they're proxy wars. We fund one side, they fund the other side. That's like how you hear about like gun runners and things like that, how the American government is arming terrorists, or how we're working with the Kurds at the parallel in Iraq. We give them their own little Kurdistan, what they've always wanted. These are proxy wars that we're fighting. And it's just a cover-up for the democracy versus the communists. That's all this is. That's all the Middle East is it's our battlegrounds, and the oil happens to be there, so it's a very good one because we profit while we're at it.
I mean, we pretty much made Al Qaeda. Like a lot of the weapons they've used, and the like I remember hearing something about, I forget if it was Saddam Hussein or Osama bin Laden or who he was, but he was in like some tunnel or whatever, like doing secret stuff in a mountain with all these weapons and stuff, and that was an FBI tunnel. You know what I mean? We created a lot of that, whether we accept that or not.
Well, I mean, that's happened before. Our old enemies, I believe it was something in Vietnam. I think like Ho Minh Chi or somebody like that. One of the guys that was like the top of the resistance, I believe, was actually he was trained by the CIA, or the precursor to the CIA. I think it was called like the OSS or something. But they were trained by us. And they ended up fighting us. And I believe there's been rumors about Osama bin Laden being trained by the FBI or what have you. Those are unsubstantiated. But hey, things that are unsubstantiated today, in a couple of years, 10, 20, 30, 50 years, we'll know the truth on.
Honestly, Flav, we don't even need to go down that road, because while there are some things like, connections between 9/11 and the Saudis and George Bush and all of that. There are like facts out there about connections between the U.S. and Saudi, connections between the U.S. and Al Qaeda. I mean, that's irrefutable. You know,
Well,
you don't
Osama
hear
bin
about.
Laden, a lot of people don't know this. He was actually a Saudi oil prince.
He was more into construction. His family helped build like sizable portions of Yemen and Saudi Arabia. I know for sure Saudi Arabia. And in fact, during the first Gulf War, he was like made a laughing stock because he didn't want, he hated us even then. He didn't want the quote unquote infidels running around in holy ground, and he was basically laughed out of the palace.
Yeah. I mean, out of
No.
all the places that the U.S. is allies with, I would say Saudi Arabia is definitely the most reprehensible. I would highly suggest unallying with Saudi Arabia. I mean, it's just not ethical.
Yeah, I mean, they still, the way they treat women, especially, that's like one major thing. You know, like I remember hearing a story, this was like a year or two ago, a woman, and this happens all the time, this happens every day, this kind of shit. But a woman, I believe, was raped. And what happened is she got killed for that.
Yeah.
It's just like there's no
Human
respect. You know,
rights.
they
Yeah.
stone women to death still in 2018, and we kind of look aside. And Trump last year had a big deal with the Saudis. He sold them a bunch of weapons and stuff like that. And I don't get it really.
Well, it's the reason that we're friends with them is one, even though they're not tame people, really, they do humane things. We're pretty sure that they'll stick with us as long as we back them. So that's why we're cool with them. They have access to a port, so we can port our ships in a strategic location. And they're a rich oil nation, which we need, so we probably get a discount on oil by the barrel. I mean, it all comes down to profit there. We're not going to pull out of that relationship because it benefits us too much, no matter what they do. You know, we'll just look the other way.
Also, don't forget that we've done a great job of turning the Middle East into a shit show, and there's a lot of resentment from decades past. Like, basically somebody decided we're going to be enemies with Iran. And then everybody started reciprocating, and it's kind of like the Hatfields and the McCoys, where it may have started off over something kind of minor, which in this case it wasn't. I mean, we helped oppose a democratically elected president in like the 50s. But, it's just gone downhill from there. And I have a feeling if the American people were actually involved in that directly, it would have gone a lot differently.
Yeah.
That's a point of irony, which I see in the whole refugee crisis. I mean, it's mostly going on in Europe and stuff, but that the Western world bombs these countries, makes all these refugees, all these poor, starving people and whatnot, and then we bring them back in. You know what I mean?
Well, I don't want to digress too much in the Middle Eastern politics because that's like the swamp. That's like a 2-3-parter by itself. But one thing I will say is you guys mentioned the proxy wars. One formula for profit that works really well, especially with the Middle Eastern mindset. Keep in mind, I have Middle Eastern relatives. I work with Middle Easterners. I love them. I think they have a lot of excellent values. They're not better than any other group of people on the planet. They're not really worse. They just express themselves in nightmarish ways sometimes. But one formula for profit is selling them defensive weapons and then sitting back and watching them try to kill each other with defensive weaponry. And that's what the Russians and the Americans have done for a long time.
Yeah.
The Saudis may be a slight exception, but they weren't really going to war with anyone until, the Gulf War happened. That was almost inevitable.
Is Saudi Is Saudi Arabia a nuclear nation?
I don't have a source for it right now, but I'd have to look it up. But there is a rumor that there's two things. First off, Pakistan made some sort of bizarre oath of fealty to Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan is nuclear.
Yeah.
The second one is that supposedly when the Saudis do start using nukes, they're going to be Pakistani nukes, and that they help bankroll Pakistan's nuclear program so that they could get access to nuclear weapons, because no one in their right mind wants to give these guys nuclear weapons, which is smart.
Well,
Frankly, we shouldn't have them. The only reason we do is because, it's cat's out of the bag, genie's out of the bottle.
I just looked it up. They're not known to have any nuclear weapons, but Israel does, I'm pretty sure.
I mean, a lot of the countries which, aren't exactly enemies of the U.S., but aren't seen well, you hear about, because we used to be in wars with them, especially during the era of the two Bush presidents. Like Iraq, Iran, countries like that, a lot of those are nuclear powers.
Yeah. I just looked it up. Israel has nukes anywhere between
Yeah,
40 and 700.
it's a tongue-in-cheek thing. They because they don't adhere to the treaty and exercise their right as a sovereign nation to do so. But they won't come out and say we're going to nuke you. But yeah, it's kind of like an open secret that they do. They have something called the Samson option, which is basically where they're going to nuke the hell out of people. If somebody does something really bad, like park a nuke in Tel Aviv or do a massive chemical weapons strike, they're going to be nuking a set number of targets, which includes Mecca and Medina and probably the major capitals of most of the guys that they feel are involved. So if somebody went after them with a WMD, a real one, not one that kills like 20 people, I'm talking like kills like hundreds of thousands, probably thousands of their citizens.
Yeah.
That's what they're looking at.
Now, Flav, looking back on a couple of months ago when Trump did a bombing of a Syrian airfield because he said that there was a chemical attack going on and that Assad was responsible for that. Do you believe, or do you think that was more of a false flag operation there?
Can you say that again? What?
So I think it was about 6 months ago, Trump did a bombing of a Syrian airfield, and it wasn't anything serious. I don't think it killed anybody, but there was a lot of thought that he was going to start a ground war in Syria, like other presidents have. Do you think that the notion that Assad, the commander of Syria, was attacking his own people with, chemical warfare? Do you think that's true? Do you believe that?
Okay, so I've heard this before. First, let me go ahead and take the Trump question. Trump bombing an Air Force base, does that concern me that we're going to get another ground war in Syria? No, it doesn't. It's perfectly normal for the president to drone strike these locations of strategic importance. That's run of the mill. Secondly, Assad gassing his own people. Do I think that he's gassed his own people? Okay, so this is something that I would have to look into a lot to make an opinion on. So this is just first thoughts. Being a little skeptical. Do I think he's ever used inhumane weapons against his people? Yes. Do I believe that it's at the extent that the media is purporting it to be? No, I don't, because I have heard a couple good arguments that, again, I won't get into because I want to research the topic more. I'll actually probably, on the next podcast, go back over this after I've researched it. But that some of these things were just false flags and not really like, when people hear false flag, not really like conspiracy, but more of like the media just hyping it up. You know what I mean? And they were using like old stock photos of people with chemical burns to say like it was sarin gas, and sarin doesn't even burn the skin. Sarin is a chemical agent. I mean, a nerve agent. You know what I mean? Sarin pretty much makes you go into a seizure and die. It's a nerve gas. It's not like.
So always remember, these people love war. War is good for ratings. It's like we're in a sick video game.
So you were saying that Trump bombing an airfield, because he thought that there was, potential of threat or potential of danger is run of the mill. And I agree with that. But what was going on at the time is there's this journalist named Mike Cernovich. And what he did, he's very famous for two things he came out with. One of them had something to do with Susan Rice and the whole Obama campaign and stuff. And the other one was that McMaster, who was the head of the military, head of defense, whatever it is for the United States at the time, it came out that he wanted a full-on ground war in Syria with about 100,000 troops on the ground. So that's why people thought it was going that direction. Yeah. The influence of him, not Trump himself.
The issue is that they say Russia may or may not be as trustworthy as we are, but Russia has their own allies. So, Syria is one of them. Syria is a client state. So what's going on is they don't want him to go because A, if they fail to protect their ally, it's going to make him look bad, and B, he's on the hook for millions and millions of dollars. So for their weapons. So it was basically a race, which we would have won, by the way, if we had rushed into Syria to remove Assad. Instead, what happened was is he had about, I think it was like a year or two. The Russians didn't intervene immediately in Syria. And then it got to the point where Assad was actually living on a ship off of the coast of the country, protected by the Russians. He's known as a president who gets on a plane with no idea where the destination is because he's essentially kind of like a puppet.
Yeah, that's what that goes back to the proxy wars. That's exactly what these powers
Yeah.
would be are, whether they be official national powers like Assad or like al-Baghdadi, like the ISIS guy, like the leader of ISIS, the Islamic Caliphate. They're always puppets. You know what I mean? They're being used.
I do think Assad has been just.
Hello? Cut out, my friend. Hello?
Yo.
Sorry, my whole internet cut out for a second. Go ahead.
All right, is it better now?
Yeah, it's better.
Yeah. So I was saying that Assad, Bashar al-Assad, the guy in charge of Syria, pretty much, although he is somewhat of a puppet and although there are problems, he hasn't treated his people the best, I think that he's really been the best we've seen in Syria in a long time. And I think that overthrowing him again and having another civil war / revolution in Syria to overthrow him would not be worth it. You know what I mean? I think that just leads to more refugees, more problems.
Yeah.
I think, he's not the best man or whatever, but he's not out here making threats against us. He's not that bad.
If you go ask a Syrian before the war started what they felt about him, they would tell you that they enjoyed the economic freedom. You see, that's the key. The key to prosperity is economic freedom. If you want to raise chickens, you should be able to, with minimal oversight and interference and corruption. And that's what was basically starting to happen is they were loosening up the economy for people that weren't just related to the Assad clan. Because remember, these guys have like hundreds, if not thousands, of relatives. It's completely different from typical Western family. And we have Western families here that are huge.
Yeah.
And sometimes these families cross borders. Like, you may have a guy who's Syrian, but he's related to like a Saudi family. But then what happened is they had the Arab Spring, and that spread from Tunisia. It went to Egypt, and that was terrible because that showed the entire Middle East that we're not going to back up our allies because we let Mubarak just be treated horribly. Whether or not you liked him, whether or not you wanted him dead, he was treated extremely shamefully, and he showed some restraint, though he did try to order the military to take matters in the hand, and that's when they kind of turned on him.
Yeah.
But Assad took a page out of his father's playbook, where he started dropping these barrel bombs on people. And there's a concept that's known as Syrian riot control, where basically what happens is say, okay, Flav, okay, Lucy, you guys are protesting my regime. That's great. You get one warning shot. Then after that, we start shooting into the crowd. So people who actually understand what's going on there shouldn't be surprised that this is the way that he's reacting.
Yeah.
You got to remember these are a minority ruling party. There's plenty of people that want to see Shiites just gone. The end game supposedly is just the Sunnis will outnumber the Shiites so much, which they already do, by the way. It's literally hundreds of millions of Shiites.
But what is
It's just different sects of Islam.
The difference is who the caliph was. Okay. When Muhammad died, he said, when Muhammad was dying, he said, okay, I'm going to put this guy named Ali. I can't remember if he was his nephew or his uncle or cousin or something in charge. Well, Ali got assassinated. So they had to split. And my Sunni friends have told me that the moment Ali died, the Sunnis immediately regretted what they did. Because instead of everybody saying, okay, well, we lost, so now we're going to just toe the line, it caused this sectarian split. And the Sunnis have had a much better time of doing outreach and missionary work to other parts of the world.
Yeah.
So there's literally like like a billion or more Sunnis, where there's only hundreds of millions of Shiites. So the
Yeah.
end game is not looking very good for the Shiites if they can't reconcile and stop automatically hitting each other. It's kind of like when Protestants and Catholics were going at it. They haven't had that moment yet. They're trying to have that moment. There's a prince in Saudi Arabia who's saying that we need to stop. We need to move out of this phase. But they haven't quite had that moment yet where they look at each other and say, we essentially believe in the same thing. We just have a political difference.
Yeah. So, is that more politically motivated? Because I don't know a lot about the Middle
In the
East.
beginning, it was political. Now they've had time to kind of be their own sect, especially the way that they were treated.
Yeah.
Like for example, Shiites have something known as like taqiyya. It's Taqqiya. Well, Islamophobes, I hate using that word, but people who hate Muslims say that it means one thing. But what taqiyya really meant was you're allowed to pretend you're not Muslim so that you can live.
Yeah, I've
So,
heard of
like
that.
for example, they would say, "Oh, Flav's this, horrible tyrant of Damascus, and he's killing all Shiite people. They're called Alawis over there. So I'm just going to pretend to be Christian,
Yeah.
and that's no skin off my back. I'm not insulting God because I want to live, and God or Allah is merciful, so He should look down upon you and say, "Hey, you're not really hurting anyone, so that's fine."
Yeah.
But the way that they were treated has influenced their sect. Like it's they are different now. I mean, not irredeemably different. I don't think they're really much more different than like a Baptist and a Catholic. If you look at it, it's really kind of more in the details. It's like, well, Baptists think that babies should be baptized, but you should have a second baptism where you actually can choose to be baptized and have consent.
Yeah.
While the Catholics are sitting here going, bro, we got more important things to do than worry about this. Like, so there's minor differences, but at the end of the day, they're not gonna matter, bro.
Yeah.
Slag, what do you, if you're familiar, what do you think that the first world, the civilized world, particularly America, should do about Wahhabism and the Salafite Muslims, which
Well,
pretty
you
much,
see, Salafism is really not good.
yeah,
What happened with
Wahhabism, yeah,
Wahhabism? Yeah, what happened is while people were fighting for the soul of the Saudi Arabian Peninsula, there's a group called the House of Saud, which is where we get the nobles in Saudi Arabia today. Well, they needed help, so they turned to the Wahhabi sect for like manpower and discipline and all these other things. So they've kind of married into Wahhabism. And personally, I look at my friends and they're live and let live. They're men of honor, women of honor. They want to live and let live. Well, any belief system that goes against that is one I'm not a fan of. And these guys, I don't think they're not really operating with the same rules that we do nowadays. Like if some guy comes to you and says, Flav, I'm gay. You're just going to say, okay, more power to you. Maybe you'll admonish them a little. Maybe you won't. Maybe you'll say like, hey, don't try to like touch me or whatever. But,
No
we
homo.
live and let live. We let ideas die or live based off of their strength. And I think that Wahhabism kind of has a artificial boost. And I don't think it even has a place in the Middle East, to be honest with you, because it's very oppressive and backwards towards women. I'm not a fan of Sharia law. Simply, actually, and I will tell you why. Simply because it's not egalitarian. If you want to have draconian laws, that's great, as long as they apply equally to everyone. Well, practice has shown that's not the case. So I don't think they even have that justification at all.
these subsections of Islam really aren't compatible with the first and civilized world. Because I mean, if you look at a terrorist organization like the IRA, back in the day, at least they had demands. They were saying, oh, we want this part of the country or whatever. But if you look at ISIS and Wahhabists and people like that, in the Muslim world, their demands are pretty much, well, we want everybody who isn't a complete follower of Allah to be dead, to be enslaved. We want the destruction of the whole entire civilized world. And it's like, well, we can't really negotiate with you there, you know?
All I'm going to say is none of us are scholars on this topic. I prefer that we move on from discussing radical Islam or Islam in general and just get back to what we were discussing, which is the military industrial complex. I mean, we did pretty good, though. I mean, I think we had a pretty good discussion on the proxy war situation and war for
Yeah.
profit. But I think this is something that, we should probably not dwell on, in my own personal opinion.
Well, I mean, it's a lot of opinionation, and like you said, we don't know that much about the Muslim religion or the situation in the sandy regions. But back to military budget, what do you think we should do if we're not going to spend that money on the military? Where do you think we should put it?
Well, okay, I'm going to go first. I think that we should be investing a lot more in ourselves. That was actually a big problem that the Spanish had with all of those gold mines and all that silver that they were getting. They never really bothered to invest in their own country. So when that money stopped coming in, they turned and looked and said, well, we still have really bad farmland,
Yeah.
really bad infrastructure, really bad education. So I feel if we are going to decrease the spending in the military, which I'm of mixed opinions, by the way, um, the I think that it should just be a peace dividend, a well managed shot in the arm of things that need it, because we have a lot of sectors that are really mismanaged. I mean, healthcare is a massive one. Um, Infrastructure is a problem. I mean, we have bridges collapsing. Our education system is terrible. Um, there's just a lot of things. It's just the problem is if we're going to take the money from the military, I don't think we should really take money from the military. I think we need to rein in the unelected warmongers, where they're literally just saying, all they see are numbers. They don't care who dies. They don't care what the long-term consequences are beyond profit. Because they're kind of assuming that we're always going to be on top. I hope that's what they assume, and then they're not just going to move like locusts, to the next receptive country. So I think that there could be a lot done that would be a force for good. Like I think the Army Engineering Corps is a very good thing to support.
Mm.
Uh, I think it's good to have our guys. I think it's good to have a military so that people understand, like, don't mess with us and don't mess with our friends. But yeah, to answer your question, my number one reinvestment would probably be education, like STEM fields. We need more men and women in those fields, in science and math and engineering, and I think that that would be good because even if we have like a brain drain, which is when smart people leave for greener pastures, which I could never see happening as long as our economy stays strong. We would still have Americans overseas, American ideas and American smarts uh, kind of prospering.
Well, I believe that we should definitely cut military spending by large margin. I don't see any reason for all the military spending that we're doing. I feel like we should put that towards healthcare, infrastructure, and making sure that our security, I mean, our systems that we have in place are running accurately, precisely, and do not fail. Like Social Security, everybody talks about that failing. Well, we need to put some money into that. We need to make sure that doesn't fail. We need to take care of our elderly. We need to take care of our veterans. We need to start taking care of our people. We need to stop looking out and start looking in. Is what I feel like we need to do with our money and with our nation's budget. Pretty simple. Not really too long-winded on that. I don't believe that we need all this money going towards the military. I just don't see a reason for it. I don't see a country. The only thing that I see as a issue for America right now would be terrorism and school shooting, gun control, things like that. You know, not that I'm for or against gun control. It's a totally different issue, but I
Well,
think it is something that needs to be looked at. You know,
I mean,
you can't have mass shootings every day in your country and say there's not a problem. There's definitely a problem in America, and I
I
believe
don't think anyone's saying there's not a problem. I think people are just arguing over what the problem is. I mean, I'm in the camp that it's just Looney Tunes out there, and that mentally unfit people are gaining access to firearms, and there's a variety of ways that they can do it. Then you have other people saying that they just need more gun control because magically then criminals won't be able to get their hands on guns or
well,
won't use,
here's the thing.
gasoline bombs.
I'm somewhere in the middle because yeah, they're Looney Tunes for sure, but every other nation has Looney Tunes and they're not having all these mass shootings. So we're doing something different and we're doing something wrong.
Well, yeah, but they also have stabbings.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's one thing.
fertilizer
Yeah,
bombings are a big
that's-
thing. Nah, I
Yeah, but
mean,
that's
fertilizer
yeah.
bombings in China, if you look up the statistics, I mean, gun violence is at a pretty all-time low. I mean, it's been going down. Violent crime, gun violence has been going down since the 60s and 70s at an alarming rate. So I don't think it's
that's kind
as
of
much
the
as a
thing.
problem. I mean, it's obviously a problem. I'd like to say for our whole budget thing, going back to that, you said, where else do you think we should be putting the money? I don't like that question because in my opinion, we shouldn't be spending that much money in general. I mean, our national budget, our national debt is projected to be bigger than our economy, than the United States economy within a decade. So, you're taxing people and you're taxing the unborn children of the country. They're going to have that burden. And I think the economy just functions better when you have a more capitalistic thing going on where people are making their own exchanges. And, I do believe we need some welfare to help our people and stuff like that. But I just don't think we should be spending all this money, period.
As far as it goes in, like, when people talk about, like, the debt and things like that, like, for me, man, I don't understand the whole national deficit thing. Like, as long as we keep doing what we're doing, I don't think we'll ever have a problem with our national deficit. I just don't see how that could happen. You know what I mean?
No, I don't.
I just, like, our economy is linked to the world's economy. So if anybody was to ever, like, default us on our debt and make us pay up, if it crashed our economy, it would crash the world economy. That's why our debt's as high as it is right now, because they're letting us get away with it because they kind of have to.
We have to pay a lot of
Interest.
yeah.
Yeah. But also,
The key. Go ahead, Flock.
But it just goes back to that if anybody ever tried to pull our card, it would crash the world's economy.
I mean, I do agree. I do find the deficit situation to be shameful, to be honest with you. And when it becomes a talking point with other countries such as China, before our current president, regularly threatened us. That would be one of their strategies would be to undermine our economy using our debt. I personally think running at a deficit is bad. If you can do it because your economy is strong and you can keep up with the interest payments and the people are overall quite happy, then go for it. But not many of us can get away with running a deficit in our real life. Not like that without some sort of consequence.
I just think the rate at which it's been increasing is insane. I mean, you look back 100 years ago, 50 years ago, it was really nothing, but now it's increasing at like 400 times the rate.
Could that be a symptom of people being in a rush?
In a rush?
Yeah, in a rush to implement their grand vision.
I think it's about spending and Social Security and all these, I mean, I'm not pointing fingers, but during the Obama campaign, the amount of spending we did and the amount our national budget went up was kind of devastating. And I mean, that's another thing with Obama is, I mean, I believe he was a good guy, but he dropped, I believe, between 100,000 and 200,000 bombs between his whole campaign, which is, bombs every day.
I wonder how much those bombs cost. I wonder how.
Don't forget, by the way, that he also
money.
ordered a drone strike on an American citizen without a.
Yeah, he is technically could be seen as somebody who committed murder indirectly.
Who, Obama?
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, there was I can't remember the
Well, I
guy's
mean,
name off the top of my head. He's another terrorist asshat that would release videos.
anybody though, man. I mean, any president that's ever ordered a war is a murderer. You know, like
I mean, yeah,
Not
but they
really,
asked him
Sloth.
if he was okay with it. It was like something like it was a civilian town. They're like, "Sir, we think there might be terrorists here, but there's a chance of striking citizens," and he okayed it. So it is his responsibility, somewhat.
well, I mean, I'm just saying, like, you're in war nowadays. Everybody's a murderer. I mean, there's just so much collateral damage that if you go to war, you're a murderer. Like, even if it's justified, you're still murdering. You know what
Well,
I
you
mean?
see,
So,
even as we sit here and we're talking about the budget, Americans are working on something called small area munitions, where they want to make sure that they can kill you dead, but the baby in the crib next to you will just wake up.
yeah.
So these are things that they are trying to develop, and it's all because urban warfare. This is the scary part: is that every military expert acknowledges urban warfare is the future.
Yeah.
That is what our boys and girls are going to be putting up with. So they're trying to change so that they're not doing massive casualties and killing everyone and turning the entire population
Well,
against just because you
that's a
killed 10
very
seconds.
modern thing to do because if you look back on like World War II and World War One, where they were bombing cities and
Oh yeah, that was
going through
total war.
yeah, that was total war. They didn't care. We live in a more peaceful time than ever nowadays.
It's very true.
The world is moving in a good direction. But the state here's the thing about the world, man. The world is moving in a good direction, but the stakes are really high, and all it takes is one fuck up to just push that big red button and blow the earth up. You know what I mean? Like figuratively. So things are getting better, but if we can just like keep our fucking monkey brains from blowing shit up long enough, or maybe not get taken out by an asteroid or some gamma burst, but if we can make it just a little bit longer, things are gonna get better for humanity. We just got to make sure we don't fuck it up.
I mean, the another issue is, guys, is that influence. If we lose influence in the globe, then aren't we technically putting all that work that was put into the past just to make it for it's just in vain? It's like, for example, when we were fighting in Iraq, the Gulf War II, post September 11th, these are some of the darkest times that we've observed as Americans that were not alive during something really, really crazy. I mean, older Americans are going to sit there and laugh at us. Some of these guys were hosed or had dogs set upon them for the civil rights movement, or they couldn't have friends because they were black or they were white or what have you. But there were some dark times coming, and Russia took full advantage of us. They were waiting. They were just waiting to the point where we were weak enough that they felt confident that they could do something. And what they did is they went after Georgia. They went after a very tiny Caucasian nation. They're in the Caucasian Mountains. They went after them, and they were saying that they were doing it for this group called.
Oh, you cut out, my friend? Hello? Did my internet just cut out?
Okay, well, we're overstretched. We're stretched out. We have no one that we can do to go over and help. There's no way we can help you. And the Russians knew it. It's like with what's going on in the Ukraine now. We baited Russia. We went to their sphere of influence. It's like we jumped in their pool and took a pee.
Yeah.
We kind of jumped in, and eventually they said, "You know what? Get out." And then suddenly people were like, they're so surprised. Wow, the Russians, they've been warning us for years, literally warning us for years that if we kept interfering and adding countries into NATO that they didn't like, or expanding the EU, that they were going to do something about it. Well, the final straw, in my opinion, was what happened with Ukraine. Ukraine's government went through probably what's known as a color revolution, where a lot of external dollars, external money had been pumped into it into opposition groups, and it culminated in a coup. What happened is this coup started because, quote unquote, someone started shooting protesters. They were protesting the government that was deposed. They started protesting, and guess what? Somebody shot at them and killed a bunch of them. And then after that, it just went downhill, and Russia basically pulled up their pants and said, okay, what excuse do we have? Okay, we gave Crimea to the Ukraine with the understanding that they were more or less going to be in our sphere of influence. Well, that's changing. They're now pro-American government. So we're going to take Crimea. Oh, the Ukraine starts acting up. Okay, well, Russia says, what other excuse do we have to go there? Oh, how about the millions of Russians that are living there who consider themselves Russian? They live in the Ukraine, but they're Russian. So now we're going to intervene, and that's what we have in the Ukraine now. And that's because we tried to take the clever angle. I don't know what the Russians would have done if we had, for some strange reason, militarily intervened in the Ukraine. I doubt it would ever have happened. Instead, we took the cloak and dagger route, and we toppled this government for better or worse, and replaced them with one that was more, in tune with us. And the Russians stepped in and said, no, that's not happening.
Yeah.
And I do think that we had a chance for the Cold War to end. We had a beautiful chance for the Cold War to end, but we didn't do our part. I think what we did is we tried to colonize Russia. We tried to colonize them economically. So it's all fine and dandy to open up McDonald's in Russia so people can eat meat for cheap. But I don't think our attitude actually changed, and I think you can see that. I really don't want to get into current political events, but I think you can see that attitude, from small examples. I'm kind of a pattern guy. One of the biggest ones, in my opinion, was when we went over there when we had a Secretary of State named Hillary Clinton under President Obama. We went there with a reset button. Do you know that we screwed up, that it didn't actually mean reset in Russian? We are the most powerful country on the planet, and we couldn't get that right. So I think the Russians looked at that and went, these people are a joke. Because I feel that you can always tell when someone doesn't respect you, even if they're not blatantly disrespecting you. There's just certain things you can tell, like, Flav, I'm going to make it for the podcast, but I don't. Or I'm going to do this, but I don't. These old things add up. And I have a feeling this attitude has never changed, and that the Russians have been this whipping boy for a very long time, and we just kind of cart them out. And it takes two to tango. Because remember, the Russians are what I call a victim people. These guys were victimized by the Mongols. They were victimized by their own government. They were victimized by the Nazis. So these are people that never want to have that happen again. The problem is they're not like the Jewish people where they have a tiny state of like a couple million people. This is Russia. They got over 200 million people who love their country. So I think that they also are, we missed an opportunity to actually truly end the Cold War.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that you believe that it never ended, because it never did. It just switched to some. Yeah, it never ended, and you could see that just in the attitude. Forget the proxy wars. You could see that just in the attitude that people have. Like, imagine being a Russian and being like, "Wow, apparently everybody else can have troll farms or interfere in countries, but we're not allowed to. We're supposed to be like the world's bad guy now."
Yeah.
This isn't a '60s James Bond movie anymore. They got rid of their evil government, because after all, communism is evil, responsible for hundreds of millions of lives. But it's like, they moved on. Well, they didn't really get anything out of it. Like that carrot, we took the carrot and shoved it where the sun don't shine.
Yeah. Well, we're coming up on our airtime, so closing thoughts for tonight, guys. Anybody got any closing thoughts?
I'm going to let you guys go first. I've ranted enough.
Okay, so my
I think
closing
it's important.
thought... Go ahead, Lucy.
All right, I was just going to say, I think it's important to, whether you think bigger government is better, or like a smaller government getting closer to anarchy. I'm more for small government personally, but I think it's important either way to try and keep it at a point where it's not going to get out of hand and controlling people's lives and the whole economy. I think America is all about individual civil freedoms. We should keep it that way.
Okay. So my closing thought would be, I definitely think we need to cut military spending and start investing it into our nation and maybe pay back some of that national debt. This has been Through the Looking Glass with Favosky, Lucy, and Slag Nasty. Catch us tomorrow for episode 10. We'll be talking about gun control in the United States and liberalism. Is it a mental illness? Coming at you tomorrow at 6:50 p.m.